Hey you and welcome. My name is Mike, and in this whole video we're looking at a guy named Joel. Joel Guy. This one takes us to Knoxville, Tennessee. It's Thanksgiving and the mighty year of 2016. And in this one, Mom and Dad cut me off! My allowance! Thanksgiving? More like no Thanksgiving! Ha ha ha. You know, I think out of all of the stories we've talked about, this one is the one that most reminds me of like a movie. I mean, it's certainly up there. In its, bizarreness is an understatement. Yeah, I don't really want to beat around the bush on this one, so let's, give it a go. It was Thanksgiving 2016. People were traveling across the globe, mask-free to see their loved ones, gonna catch up on some football and chomp down on some gobble gobble. That foggy 24th of November, the people of Knoxville woke up, turned the ovens on. In the Guy family household, the dinner preparations had already started. The turkey was being prepared and stuffed, ready for the oven. Potatoes boiled and roasted and mashed, I imagine. Don't know, Irish don't celebrate Thanksgiving, but I'm sure it was fantastic. The patriarch and matriarch of the Guy family were Lisa and Joel Sr., and they were getting into their seniors. Lisa was 55, Papa Joel 61. That Thanksgiving they had their 4 children over. Now Joel Sr. had 3 daughters from a previous marriage, Candice, Michelle and Angela. Lisa and Joel Sr. also had a son together, 28-year-old Joel Jr., or as the family called him, Joel Michael. Now, of course, with the whole family together after some time apart, it's not always, sweet nothings and words of love and all that shit exchanged. They had some serious issues to yap away about. Some topics best discussed in person with the whole family together. And that was the case with the Guy family. Lisa and Joel Sr. had some news for their 4 kids. They were gonna retire. Joel was an engineering designer, Lisa a full-time mother, who then, as her children grew, went on to become an accounting administrator. So they were both going to pack all that in, sell the family home and move into Joel Sr.'s mother's house. His mother had passed away a few years previous. Now, there seemed to be an agreement between all 4 kids that, yeah, good idea, you earned it. The children, they were all adults, they were all grown up, and while the 3 daughters, they lived still in the state, they still lived in Tennessee. Son, Joel Michael, he lived in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So, happy out. The family holiday passed in good spirits. In fact, they were already talking about spending the Christmas holiday together. The daughters left on Friday, the 25th, but Joel Michael decided to stay on a little longer. Then, he also returned to his home in Baton Rouge on the 27th of November, the Sunday after Thanksgiving. It was the next day that, the shit hit the fan. It was Monday, the 28th of November, that Lisa failed to show up for work, and her boss called the police reasonably quickly because she couldn't get through to Lisa on the phone, and Lisa, if she was sick or couldn't make it to work for whatever reason, she would, be sure. She was definitely one of those people who would let you know. The police arrived shortly after to the Guy property to carry out a welfare check. One thing they did notice was a for sale sign present in the front garden. So it looked like the guys were serious about packing it in and retiring. Also, there were 2 cars parked at the house and the light in the foyer was on. The officers rocked up, knocked on the door, rang the buzzer. No response. They then called a detective as things were looking bit shifty. While they were like snooping around the house, you know, peering in the windows, they went to the neighbors and were like, when was the last time you seen the guys? Which guys? So there was the realtor's sign, but no lock, box, that kind of thing. Peering through the windows, they could see groceries, beers, bacon, the good stuff. And they could tell the house was warm and had a weird smell. And a dog was barking faintly inside. The feeling from the house was getting more and more disturbing as the seconds ticked by. Wait till they get inside. They eventually did when one of the officers pressed the garage door buzzer thingy, and they ventured in.
Hello, sheriff's office! There's Don walking in. Oh, shit, though.
I hear a dog howling.
Knox County Sheriff's Office!
I'm hammered.
Police!
It's at this point that things turn into what's like the grossest, most disturbing, gruesome horror movie you can think of. Double it.
Police Department, Sheriff's Office!
Straight away, they could tell something was really wrong. As the officers were entering the main area of the house, the first thing they noticed was the heat. The temperature was quite high, and there was also a chemical odor emanating from the entire home. There were random items on the dining area floor, plastic bags, bleach, towels. The dining table had some specific items on it as well, including a couple of wallets, seemingly one that was a man's, one that was a woman's. There was some money, a cell phone, and a hammer. In the kitchen area, the officers found the stove and the oven on, turned up to a high heat. There was also a big pot on the top of the stove, with its contents simmering away. Was I too subtle? There was nothing good inside the pot.
Back everybody out. That's blood, right? Everybody
Looks like it.
Yeah, blood or boo-boo?
It looks like blood.
Anybody got gloves on?
Yeah, I'm not supposed to.
Knox County Sheriff's Office! We're here to check your welfare! And just drop that.
There was a dog barking somewhere in the house. It sounded like it was coming from an upstairs room. There was no sign of anyone around the ground floor, and so they proceeded up the stairs, on which were reddish-brown stains. Then on the landing, straight down the hall, was an open door. Blood was on the ground and on the walls, and they could see hands. Going down, they found that the hands, they were not attached to anything.
This room's clear. Hold up. Oh my God. Got people's hands? Yeah, I think so. That's what I see.
The officers then proceeded to clear the house and check for, a handless person. They went into the master bedroom. The bed was made, it was neat, but the chemical smell was really strong, and there was an additional smell lingering in there as well. That's when they went into the ensuite. Plastic sheeting was covering the floor. There was a garden hose attached to the shower instead of a normal head, and a massive knife in the sink. And on the ground, there were 2 large plastic tubs next to each other. Inside the tubs were the dissolving remains of 2 people. By looking at the bodies, they assumed that was the remains of Joel Sr. and Lisa Guy. The remains that remained. The house then became a crime scene and evidence. A treasure trove, I guess you could say, because everything was everywhere, and what happened all over the house. At the back door were unopened bin bags, 3 bottles of bleach, muriatic acid, baking soda. A sprayer was beside. Guns and ammo were left laid out on the dining table. Food and groceries were left laid out. Recently purchased, but things that were supposed to be refrigerated weren't, interestingly enough. On the staircase were piles of clothing that had been cut up, beside which was a blood-stained scissors and blood-stained knife. In fact, there was blood evidence just, everywhere, really, as well as knives and bleach. Evidence of a cleanup, but not a cleanup. As if somebody went off, bought a load of bleach, baking soda, all that kind of stuff, and then came back to the house, took one look around, and said, fuck that. The scene was in such a state that it seemed that whoever killed Joel Sr. and Lisa, they didn't just want to kill them, they wanted to annihilate them. It took 2 entire days to go through and cover the entire crime scene. Once that was done, the police thought they had a clear idea of what had happened. Pretty sure even Sherlock Holmes could deduce. It was bad. It was Joel who was attacked first, probably sometime late morning on Saturday, the 26th of November, inside the gym room. He had suffered dozens and dozens of sharp force injuries while he was being murdered, about 42 altogether. It was hard to determine the exact number due to the dismemberment process that took place after he was dead, though 34 cuts on his back showed that he had suffered them while alive. He suffered injuries to his lungs, his kidneys, his liver, his ribs. He had multiple cuts on his hands. He tried to protect himself and was fighting for his life. His hands were then removed from his body and left just inside the gym, poking out the door. Like something from a movie, a grisly scene, for the police to find. It's like that thing in Jurassic Park, remember?
Oh, Mr.
Lisa arrived home then from Walmart and was jumped as she came in the front door. She didn't even have a chance to put the groceries away. She was brutally slayed. She suffered from at least 25 sharp object wounds. It was hard to determine just how many there was due to the composition of her remains. Once both were dead, the murderer started the cleanup, which at the start didn't involve bleach and that sort of thing. Because it gets worse. Joel Sr.'s arms were removed, his legs were removed from the hips, his right ankle was separated from the rest of his leg. His body parts were placed inside the chemical bath, most of his skin dissolved, except the skin on his back. Lisa's arms were also removed from the shoulders, her legs removed at the knees, her head was severed. Her body parts were placed inside the other blue tub, inside the chemical bath, but not her head. Lisa's head was found somewhere else. Remember the pot on the stove? Lisa Guy's head was simmering away in that pot for 2 days before it was found. I believe that's the most monstrous and disturbing thing I've ever said. That's gonna be a hard one to top. The police didn't waste any time checking the CCTV of nearby stores. And looky here, who did they see buying stuff with bandaged hands? On Tuesday, November 29th, an arrest was made all the way over in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The person being charged with the first-degree murders was none other than Joel Guy Jr. himself. Authorities identified him as a suspect with the aid of Walmart surveillance video that appeared to show him purchasing items within the residence that were apparently used in the attempted destruction of the crime scene. When they arrested him, they found his hands were covered in cuts and nicks. Inside his car, they also recovered a meat grinder and a gasoline canister. So, what happened? Well, the police think his plan changed, actually. His original plan was different, but after he murdered his parents, his hands got cut to shit, so he had to abandon his cleanup of the scene. He left it unfinished and went back down to Baton Rouge, Louisiana to take care of his paws. He was going to come back and finish it off, but he was, casual about it. I'll get up there eventually. Don't worry about it.
Well, man faces first-degree murder charges in the deaths of his parents in West Knox County. Authorities have taken 28-year-old Joel Michael Guy Jr. into custody. Guy is a college student in Louisiana. The Knox County Sheriff's Office called the crime scene gruesome. Investigators say the parents suffered multiple stab wounds and were dismembered. The Sheriff's Office says the couple was last seen Friday. WBIR 10 News anchor Kendall Morris joins us from West Knox County, where the couple's remains were found in their home Monday.
It would be described as horrific, a very gruesome crime scene.
Sheriff's officials say they found the remains of the guys inside. Investigators say Joel Guy Jr. stabbed, cut up, and placed the remains in an acid-based solution to destroy evidence.
Some of us have seen scenes like this. They are very, very rare. It's in the 1 percentile of homicides in the United States that involve mutilation or dismemberment.
Investigators are still working to find a motive.
I don't think anybody can imagine to the extent of the horror that went on.
Now, Joel Jr., he made quite the plan. Surprising, really. I mean, does this look like a guy with a plan? He, in fact, wrote it all down, if you can believe it. A 5-page detailed script that he would follow, called The Book of Premeditation. And that was found in the house. He had left it inside his backpack. Just casually, leaving his little manifesto, his plan, leaving it lying around. Sure, it's grand. Let's give it a go, shall we? Get killing knives. Quiet. Multiple. Get sledgehammer. Crush bones. Bring blender and food grinder. Grind meat. Get bleach. Denature proteins. Get plastic bin for denaturation process. Does not matter where they're killed. Just get rid of bloody spots to prevent evidence of time of death. Not the mattress or couches. Get rid of bodies inside house. Flush chunks down toilet. He's not alive to claim her half of the insurance. Money, all mine, $500,000. Flood the house, covers up forensic evidence. Turn heater up as high as it goes. Speeds decomposition. Bleach reacts with luminol just like blood. Douse area with bleach. According to family members and a friend of Joel Michael, he was always an outsider. He never made the effort to be in touch with his family. And I guess after some years, his family felt the same way about him. Except his mother, Lisa. She would call him all the time, send him money, pay for his place in Baton Rouge. His childhood toys were kept inside the family home. They cared for him. His mother cared for him. And she ended up with her head inside a boiling pot courtesy of her son. She paid for everything. Every paycheck she got went to Joel, who did nothing. So all the love his parents gave him, doing everything for him. Well, he didn't feel the same way, obviously. He sat through the entire trial without showing any remorse No guilt whatsoever.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time and attention this week. I want to thank you in advance. We expect to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that on November the 26th of 2016, Joel Michael Guy Sr. was viciously attacked in his home in the exercise room that he had upstairs. During this assault, he sustained 42 sharp force injuries. You're going to hear proof from the medical examiner and from a forensic anthropologist about these injuries. And what you're going to hear is that these injuries were so severe that marks were left on his ribs, 12 of his ribs, marks ranging from scratches to complete severing. Ladies and gentlemen, we believe that at the end of our proof, at the conclusion of everything, turn it off, you will find Joel Michael Guy Jr. guilty of every count of this indictment because we will have proven it to you beyond a reasonable doubt. Thank you very much for your attention.
I am John Holstead. This is Mark Stevens, and we are representing today Mr. Guy. Thank you.
See, the whole reason for this was that Joel Sr. and Lisa, who had taken care of him all of his life, gave him money, would pay for everything. He did jack shit. They were finally gonna cut off his allowance. You know? He was 28, had to stand on his own 2 feet. Get a job. Joel wasn't too keen on that, so he decided to brutally, remorselessly murder his parents in the most horrific way I think I've encountered in a story like this. He planned to commit the murders for insurance purposes. Lisa had a $500,000 life insurance policy, so he couldn't just kill his mom, he had to kill his dad as well to ensure he got it. Joel Michael made a decision that both of his parents had to be gone for him to receive the whole amount of money and everything else. He detailed his parents' assets, what they had and what he was hoping to get, including both houses. If you're looking, by the way, as I am, for an explanation as to why exactly he did what he did, you're not going to find one. Why he murdered his parents in such a brutal way. I mean, for a start, he stabbed them to death when there was guns and ammo lying around, so he really wanted to get his hands dirty. And then, what he did to their bodies after. That one stumped, I think, everybody. And, I mean, did he think he was gonna get away with it? I mean, take one look at him. He doesn't look like a bright spark, to be fair. I mean, the fact that he, got all the stuff to clean up the crime scene and then left. And that's when it was discovered. And that, was he gonna come back and finish it off, Just gonna leave it there, fester for a few days, and I'll deal with it later, Maybe he was just enjoying it, wanted to savor it.
So the fact that his fingerprints are at some point on some objects doesn't mean that that's necessarily related to this homicide. And on the notebook, they also did not bring in a handwriting sample to say, yes, this is his writing. The burden is on them to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt. And they didn't do that. Flight. Yes, he went back to Louisiana. That was the plan all along, wasn't it? Son going to come up for Thanksgiving, son going back home. That's all we know. We don't know anyone was chasing him back to Louisiana. And where did he go? Where was he arrested? At his apartment. He wasn't fleeing. He wasn't hiding. He went home. We believe the state has not proven any of these charges beyond a reasonable doubt. We ask that you find Mr. Guy not guilty.
Nobody else had a reason to do this, okay? No one else. And the proof in this case isn't strong. It isn't it isn't anything other than overwhelming. Overwhelming.
He asked for the death penalty if found guilty, which he obviously was.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Joel Michael Guy, guilty of first-degree premeditated murder of Joel Guy Sr.
Count number 2, please.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Joel Michael Guy, guilty of first-degree premeditated murder of Lisa Guy.
Joel Guy Jr. was found guilty by the jury on all 7 counts. He didn't get the death penalty, though. He was sentenced to life in prison for 2 counts of first-degree premeditated murder, 1 count of felony murder for killing Lisa Guy while committing first-degree murder of Joel Guy Sr., and 2 counts of felony murder while committing theft. He was also charged with an additional 4 years imprisonment for the abuse of corpses. Now, of course, his lawyers, God love them, argued against consecutive sentencing, and they argued against the additional 4 years. A whole 4 years after, life in prison. The defense said that, Joel, he had no prior criminal history, and would be an old-ass man by the time of his release, meaning he was no danger to society by that point. The judge didn't buy into that bullshit.
In this particular case, I don't see any potential rehabilitation of Mr. Guy. I was watching him during the trial. He showed absolutely no remorse or despair at seeing what he had done. Quite frankly, Mr. Guy, you look like kind of proud of what you had accomplished. And so I think we could have 500 years to try to rehabilitate Mr. Guy and be unsuccessful. So I think that factor as well weighs toward confinement in those counts as well.
I agree. Some people are just monsters. Really, no amount of help is gonna change that. By the way, I have no idea what's the story with that weird lump on his face. Hell, as it turns out, Joel even threatened to gouge out his cellmates, in jail, his cellmates' eyes, because he wanted to sell all to his lonesome. He would. Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if he did. I mean, by this point, I'm surprised we haven't heard of his name in the news, earlier in his life. I mean, this guy seems like he was a ticking time bomb. And, covering all the other bad people we've covered on that chapter, I don't think any were as imaginative as Joel Guy Jr. was. And that's the story of that one. Probably the most gruesome, I would say, we've talked about to this point. I mean, we've talked about all sorts of crime scenes, but head boiling in a pot. That's a new one. I hope I won't have to say that line ever again. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I'll see you as always real soon in, the next one. All the best. Mike out.